I think especially today, just about time to head to the gym. Especially today and moving forward, the value of nurses is going to grow because we live in a time period. Most nurses are women. It's like 90, maybe 93% of all nurses are women. 25% of people who enter into nursing school graduate and go for their first job quit by year one. By year three, 40% of nurses quit and move on to other aspects of work. Especially nowadays, where you see a lot of women that are utilizing the internet and things like OnlyFans. You have a lot of welfare. And this is how many of these women are able to stay alive, because you have a large portion of men that are not participating in the labor market. Well, how are these people able to survive? Well, a lot of them are living at home. You saw 50% of all 50% of all millennials were forced to move back home, which means that they're diving into luxuries. They don't have to pay rent, don't have to pay gas. They might not be paying for food. Maybe they're contributing a little bit to help their parents. And so most of that excess cash that they have is now going into luxuries. And so you see women that are basically selling themselves on the internet. There's actually a video that I recently just saw where in Queens, I forget this part of Queens, but it used to be a very avid area for prostitution. And well, guess what? It's making its way back. Maybe I'll link the video. Somebody send it to me. And this is what we're going to see moving forward. But it's moved to internet prostitution. So instead of women having to go onto the streets to sell their bodies physically, they're now selling themselves over the internet globally. And so because most of these industries that are female dominant, like for example nursing, are going to suffer. The same thing is going to happen in the medical field, because 50% of all doctors are women. Up to 40% of them quit by year 6 or go part-time because they become pregnant. And the AMA, did a study on this, talking about, how can we impact women psychologically? And this is basically what it comes down to. How do we impact women psychologically so that we can utilize them in the workforce? And how do you do that? You propagandize to them. You utilize propaganda, telling them it's better to work. You demonize being a mother. You demonize, wanting to be a housewife, because you need them to work. Why? Why does the government need these women to work instead of putting the men to work? It's because they need to spread the dollar. And so men will regulate women's spending always, because men have to go out and work. And so because men are going out there and working for their wives, for their children, to bring money home, they feel the labor. And so to reduce the workload on their bodies, they tell the women to stop spending so much. And the government knows this, and so do big businesses. And so they work hand in glove. This is what fascism is, where both the government and the big businesses operate together to impact society. And so what they do is they work together via propaganda. The state utilizes propaganda. It's been demonizing men for the better part of 100 years. Originally, this was utilized to impact minorities, because minorities were growing. They were having children. They were entering into the workplace. This is where unions came from. If you look back, the idea of a union came when Black Americans, after slavery, started entering into the workforce and they started competing. And despite racism, at the end of the day, businesses only cared about the color of the dollar. As long as you were bringing in the green, they didn't care if your skin was dark, brown, light, white, etc. And so they introduced unions where they said you couldn't hire anybody if they weren't white. And so we have unions today that stem from a system of racism against minorities. And so the tables flipped when the government wanted to, this is what the purpose of a central bank was, is the introduction of Marxism. One of the tenets of Marxism, of socialism, is a central bank and the removal of private property. And so the way the government does that is by propagandizing the women, pushing them into the workforce. Now you have more people that you can tax. Now you have more people who will spend. Now you have more people who are working to buy products overseas, to send those dollars out overseas. So that keeps the system going. And so the government can't afford to let women go back to being housewives because men will regulate their spending. And most advertising and spending is geared towards women. Same thing with credit card debt. 2/3 of all credit card debt is held by women. 2/3 of all college debt is held by women. This is by design. It is by design this way. They're not doing you a favor, telling you you're strong, you're independent, right? Diversity is our strength. Diversity is our strength as the government. That's why they repeat that. It's a mantra. But it's their mantra. It's not yours. They get you to think that it's yours. They get you to believe that this is to your benefit when it is to your detriment. Men were typically sparing women from having to go out and basically be slaves to the government or being slaves to labor. And so nowadays, there's no fixing this problem. There's no putting the genie back into the bottle because you have generations of women that have been propagandized to. This same thing happened in Venezuela. They had the slut walks. They had, where the women were walking out there showing their titties, in the street. We don't need men. We're strong. We're independent. We can do whatever we want, right up until they were eating zoo animals and they were going through the garbage for food. And most of those women that are educated, in quotes, most of these women ended up having to go to Colombia. And they became prostitutes, real prostitutes. You go to Colombia, you go to places like Medellin, you go to places like Cartagena, some places in Bogota, like when you go, like there's like certain clubs, basically brothels. And you'll meet some of the most beautiful and some of them very well-educated women, and they're prostitutes. And this is what happens. This is what happens with socialism. This is what you see in America. Despite Joe Biden talking about the unemployment rate is the lowest that it's been, we have the highest amount of men who are not participating in the labor market. You have 1/3 of the country that doesn't participate in the labor market. And so in socialism, you just have a smaller and smaller workforce. What does that do? It reduces the goods and services that are available to the country because you have less people that are participating in it. And this is what we have going on. This is by no means something that is just in America. It's all of the West. All of the West pushed for socialism. And this is what we have. I think it's like 60% of all countries share many of the tenets of socialism. And it doesn't take too long and it doesn't take too many generations for that to go bad. And this is basically where we're at. And so if you have a skill, the most important thing you can do is to build up in another country that doesn't share the tenets of socialism, or at the very least, as a man, where you have more control over your family. In America, it is to the government's benefit to propagandize both your wife, your girlfriend, and your children against you, to extract resources from you. And so since that's the case, regardless of whether they're a good woman or not, they're just no point, there's no reason to date them. You open yourself up to liability. And so that's why since 2017, I stopped dating in the West because of it's too much of a liability, especially if you're a skilled individual. And as you get older, like I'm 43 now. And because of the shortages, we're seeing nurses that are basically out earning doctors. And so nurses becoming more valuable than a doctor, because a doctor can write a script for many patients, but a nurse can only take care of so many patients. And so because the limit is on the nurse and not the doctor becomes less valuable, because you can have one doctor. I remember when I was working in North Dakota at night, and we had one doctor that covered almost the entire hospital, but a nurse can't do that. And so nurses become more valuable. That's why you're seeing nurses that are out earning general practitioners that are out earning nurse practitioners by sometimes twofold. And it's because they're becoming more necessary. And since most of them are women, and as women leave the fold, then nurses just become more and more valuable. And it becomes more difficult to get women to go to nursing school for 4 years and to say, you're going to be dealing with patients, with sick people, changing patients and dealing with shit like that. It's not what women will choose to do, especially when you're like, what do you mean? I can be on OnlyFans. I can be on social media. I can be on Twitter or YouTube or Twitch, or I can be on Instagram and I can farm simps for loose change, or I can just be up under a man. Why would they go through the process of becoming educated? Women are, because of all of the excess welfare that is going around. And if push comes to shove, the women will just live poor. And that's what you see in the Black community. That's exactly what you see in the Black community, where you have a large portion of women that are on some form of public assistance, and they just fuck for sport. And they get pregnant, and then they just petition the government for more money. That's women. If women can, they will. If women can get resources easier from the government than they can having to be friendly and having to be fit and having to cook and clean, right, and do all that stuff. I mean, shit, the government doesn't even require women to be mothers to their kids. And they'll still get welfare, or they'll still get alimony, or they'll still get child support. And so it is what it is. People will just go the route of least resistance. And that's why you see a lot of women going this route. And it's not going to change. The only way that it changes is when it all comes down, when it all collapses. And that's exactly what happened in places like in Venezuela. When it all came down, then the women became fit because they weren't able to get cheap food. And food was too expensive. They had to be friendly because they were reliant on men, one way or another. That's why you see a lot of men that go to places like Medellin. They go to places like Sausua. They go to these sex tourist areas, and then they spend their dollars in those areas, and then they take the same problem that exists in the West, and they take that culture over there. Anyway, I'm off to the gym. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.